Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman. Thanks for joining us. And today I am thrilled to have with me a friend that I've known for a long time. I was going to say an old friend, but a friend that I've known since I was 6 years old. And her name is Cook-Cottone. And we lost touch for many years. And I was stunned to find out that she also has a PhD in educational psychology. So kind of a small world. So let me read her bio to you because her bio is pretty amazing. And this is only part of what she does. So Cook-Cottone is a professor in the Department of Counseling, School, and Educational Psychology at the University of Buffalo, where she teaches courses on mindful therapy, yoga for health and healing, self-care and service, eating disorder prevention, and other things. Presenting nationally and internationally, she uses her model of embodied self-regulation to structure discussions on empirical work and practical applications. Similarly, her research focuses on embodied self-regulation, i.e. yoga, mindfulness, and self-care, and psychosocial disorders such as eating disorders and trauma. Her research has been funded by Lululemon, the National Science Foundation, and UNICEF. She is the author of 7 books and over 85 academic chapters and research articles. She is a registered yoga teacher and founder of Yogis in Service. Mm-hmm. Catherine, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you for making the time. I know you're very busy. So can you go into your model on embodied self-regulation?
Sure. It was back when I first started my academic career, and I kept trying to fully understand eating disorders and other disorders where you reach outside of yourself to self-regulate and what's going on. And I kept trying to figure it out, formulate, and I started drawing pictures and eventually came up with this model. And because I didn't have anything like that out there, I went ahead and started publishing on it and trying to study it. And so that's what I've been doing since then. The model essentially looks at the self as this experience in the very center of 2 ways of being, or 2 ways that we are being. And one way is our internal experience of self. So that is at the core is your physiology. Yeah, your physiology, your body. And then you have kind of building on that, your emotions, and then your cognitions. And you have an attunement with all of those things internally. And here you are, the experience of self. And it's not, that's not all there is, that we work within this whole ecological system. And most, we call them in psychology, ecological models, have the self in the center. And I wanted to break that out and say, like, no, it's the outward facing experience of self with the inward facing experience of self, the internal self being as important, right? Mm-hmm. So then we have out there, what are we dealing with? Our friends, our loved ones, close family, the community we live in, and the communities within which we function, and then our culture. So it's how you are with the people that you love, but it also, let's say, like we were on swim team, mm-hmm. right? What's the culture on your swim team? For some people, it's their culture at the gym, their culture at the CrossFit, culture at the yoga studio, culture at the PTA, culture, right? And then we have the culture that we're living in that's even bigger, that's state, community, all the way up to kind of the national culture, your religious culture that you live in. And you're negotiating all of that while working to stay really attuned internally, right? So you're managing stress and conflict on the outside, love and connection on the outside, while you're also working to handle stress and conflict on the inside and love and connection on the inside.
It's interesting. I see clients where I see them over-focus on one half of the model versus the other. For instance, I can see depressed people over-focusing on the internal model versus the external model.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then treatment, we know treatment for depression, one of the things that we do is we schedule pleasant events with people that you care about and that are supportive of you. We get them into the outside self, right? The outside aspects of self. And that is as much of you as your internal. Whereas eating disorders, right? I might see myself only in terms of how other people view me. Am I like pretty enough? Am I the right size? Am I the right shape? Am I funny enough? Like I begin to only see myself as an object that other people see. And that's my only value.
Well, and it's funny because I could see anxiety disorders being in the same boat there, but then a lot of people have coexisting depression and anxiety. Because anxiety people are very worried about how people see them and think that eyes are on them all the time, when in fact, most people are just looking at their phone.
Yeah. It's so when I work with a patient, I have them really kind of think through all the domains in their life and where the stresses and challenges really lie. And then we can focus the treatment plan on the domains. And there's typically stuff on the internal self and external self that's kind of gives us good fuel to work with, good stuff to dig into.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for going over that. I find the model fascinating. I could see a lot of usefulness to it. So let's drill down into one of the areas in the internal self, which is yoga, which is a passion of yours, which, to me focuses a lot on thought, feeling, and physiology. Mm-hmm. So can you go into some of the benefits that we found in research about yoga? Because to me, and I'm kind of biased, I see in this country more women than men doing yoga, at least locally.
Yeah. So a few things there. And I found, so when we go over to Africa, and we've been working with the Africa Yoga Project, doing research with them, many times there's more men in the studio than women. So it's fascinating how it can be different country to country.
So it's cultural.
Yeah. And then you also get down into like the women's role in the culture. And if like in some countries, women maybe exercise more privately. Or they're with their bodies in different ways. So many different factors.
I can see in some cultures, some women might not feel it's modest enough to exercise publicly.
Yeah. And then kind of getting the right gear. So I think it's an exciting time for people who do yoga apparel to really kind of thinking through yoga apparel for cultures where women like to cover more.
Where yoga pants might not be appropriate.
Right. It would be a whole different kind of yoga gear. Mm-hmm. So yoga really helps to allow you to spend time with that internal aspect of self. And the whole system is really developed to help you turn outward in a different, more self-regulated way. And even if you look way back to the yoga philosophy, some people talk about the Yoga Sutras as really kind of helping you work with the internal self. And the Bhagavad Gita really talking about how do you have the outward facing yogi, and how do you remain in a yoga practice while you're out there in the world.
Can we backtrack for just a second? I just had the awareness that some listeners may not know what we mean by self-regulation.
Oh, sure. So self-regulation is it has a few steps in it, but one of them is a self-awareness, an awareness that you're not regulated. So that would be the first thing, right? Is you have to like know what's going on to do something about it. So it's having awareness of your body, your heart rate, your breath, what's going on physiologically. Am I being activated or I'm not activated enough? Am I in an activated state that matches the challenge in front of me? Or is there a mismatch? So you're noticing that awareness. And then if we work through the model, there's an emotional layer. So then in my self-regulation, kind of what emotion is present or what emotions are present, what's their intensity, what's going on with them. I have an awareness of that. And then I even have an awareness of my cognitions as they're running through my mind. Do they seem rational or negatively oriented or a good fit for what I have as a goal in this present moment? And then as I am with those things, I then take a pause, right? Or practice being really effective and automatic through things like yoga. And then when I'm well self-regulated, I can work effectively in my external environment and my internal world by making choices I might downregulate my nervous system by grounding my feet and taking a deep breath. I might decide to take a pause and be with a wave of grief as it moves through me, right? I might decide to cancel a meeting that I have later in the week just to give myself that kind of extra space to cultivate well-being because I'm aware. So that's a kind of long, concrete description of self-regulation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So let's get back to the benefits of yoga.
So yoga, Timothy McCall wrote a great book on yoga, essentially like the health benefits of yoga. And he says it really well. He says that yoga helps everything that stress hurts because it works on the stress response. Mm-hmm. So, and I like also, we kind of all acknowledge like there isn't a particular disorder that we would say like yoga cures this, right? But what it does is if you're in treatment for cancer, what it can do is really kind of amplify the cancer treatment because it's helping you self-regulate, help you manage your stress so that your system can heal. So we see positive effects in patients with all sorts of medical complications like cancer, kidney problems, cardiac problems, all kinds of physical disorders, back pain. It's been now shown to be non-inferior to PT with back pain among veterans. So it's exciting. And then with mental health issues and mental illness, there can be positive outcomes in depression, anxiety. We've seen in eating disorders, anything that kind of can benefit from the flattening out of the stress response.
Yeah, and so speak to the stress response a little bit, would you? The parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system, because I think that's a huge deal.
Yeah. And that gets us back to self-regulation too, is so we have, we have our voluntary nervous system that we're all familiar with. Like I can decide to talk and then I'm talking. I decide to reach my hand forward and I'm reaching it forward. I choose how I'm acting. And then back in the day, they called it the autonomic nervous system because it was believed to be automatic. Mm-hmm. But what we're learning now, and it's the nervous system that makes your heart beat, helps you get a startle response if something scary happens. It's believed to be kind of a protective, automatic nervous system that functions in the background, and we don't do things on purpose with it. But what they found is that, what we found actually, as researchers, that we have a lot more control over our autonomic nervous system than we thought. So in that system, you have your sympathetic, which is fight, flight, and when it pairs up in an interesting way with your parasympathetic, a freeze response. And then with your parasympathetic nervous system, you have the repair and rest and restore. And we move kind of in and out of those systems throughout the day based on apparent stress and challenge and work. And with yoga practice, you can actually, and mindfulness practice, any really mind-body practice, you can really down-regulate the sympathetic nervous system and up-regulate in a positive way the parasympathetic nervous system, allowing you to be two things that are cool: alert and engaged and still calm.
Yeah. So how would you comment on Descartes' famous quote, "I think, therefore I am"?
Well, I'm an academic, so I think that's true.
I just think Descartes screwed us so badly because he effectively separated mind from body for hundreds of years.
I know.
With that one statement.
Yeah, and I'm right now in the final proofs of a book on embodiment, and I went deep into the philosophy, and he's not the only one, right? And we kind of in our culture, we fight our bodies, we see our bodies as other, we see them as challenges or things we have to fix and make a certain shape or size. We don't see them as ourselves,
right?
As our partners, as our resources. And you literally are your body. Like your brain, whatever's thinking what you're thinking, that's tissue working. Like when your body's not there anymore, I mean, you're not a human being as we know it anymore. Whatever your belief system is, I don't know after death, but when you're in your body and you're alive, like you are your body.
Yeah. I remember when I first started studying emotions many years ago, the realization that emotions are embodied, that if you're looking to figure out how you feel, you put your attention on your body primarily.
Yeah. And New Men May, and I hope I'm saying the name right, New Men May has come out with a series of studies that I love, where the team the first study was 700 participants, and they elicited emotions from the participants, and then they had them show on a diagram of the body where they felt an increase of sensation, where they felt a decrease, and they made these body maps of emotions. So if anybody who's listening wants to look this up, you just have to Google body maps of emotions and then image, and the images will come up from their research. Many of my colleagues here, we have them printed out and we use them in private practice all the time.
Yeah, it's one of the first things I use with clients, with men.
Yeah, because it's like, look, your body, your emotions live in your body. So the first step often for me in teaching patients about emotions who struggle to feel and identify them is simply to listen to their own heartbeat. Like, just like that, this is the home of my emotions. And this is like one of the places this connection begins. So just simply beginning with like sensation detection. And this is the work of yoga. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it would be, okay, now can I pay attention just to sensations? And there's simple work like a body scan. You can Google how to do a body scan by just doing a body scan. And that's an insula workout. And the insula is the part of the brain that tells us what's going on in our body. And then the next step would be, I'm having an emotion. Now I've been practicing being with my body. Can I like describe where that is in my body? Is it moving? Is it around my heart? Is it in my belly? Do I feel it in my arms? And then like, what's the word of that emotion? Anger, sadness, grief. And then how does that show up in my body? And I simply be with it. Mm-hmm. And the beauty is emotions are so compelling that we almost feel like we have to do something, and getting really embodied with emotion work lets you just simply be with what's happening and almost like listen to the emotion and be with it. Like what it is. It's just a kind of a messenger for you. Like,
well, that dovetails with your concept of courageous warrior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Because I love the idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's because I was thinking yoga is so funny. Everybody thinks of it as like this, and it is a beautifully calming practice. And it's also a very courageous practice because it's not easy to feel everything this life brings up. There are a lot of powerful things.
Scary as hell.
Yes.
Let's put a real tag on it.
Right. In yoga and mindfulness, we own that everybody that in your life that you love, like you will eventually lose, right? There's great courage in then being close and loving anyway, right? Even your own body, that it will eventually, like pass, and you will pass. And so great courage in connecting with something that you'll eventually separate from, right? So this courageous warrior, and you think in yoga, we have warrior 1, warrior 2, warrior 3, they're poses, and we press our feet into the ground and we draw into our belly and we lift our hearts and we open our chest and we feel what we feel, right? So this idea of, in our culture, that burying emotions is kind of the thing to do, that someone who doesn't feel them is, like I'm stronger if I don't feel something. You're actually, like, the capacity to feel is a tremendous strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if you look at the best leaders, I think the best leaders have the ability to identify what they feel and use their emotions largely via storytelling to inspire and motivate others.
Yeah, right. And I like, there's Baron Baptiste is a yoga teacher that teaches power yoga. One of his quotes is, I'm probably going to say it all wrong, but it's something like, you're teaching all the time, right? We're teaching all the time. And sometimes we even use words. But a great leader has the capacity to be with everything that's there, consider everything, factor in their own ignorance, and then move forward. Keep whether it's the program, whether it's the company, whatever it is, the family, keep things kind of in the moment and moving forward.
Yeah, sort of embodied leadership.
Exactly. Wow, that next book.
Yeah. You've worked with a lot of high-performing men as well. And what are some of the commonalities or a commonality that you see among men who are high performers?
Well, it's interesting because I think the culture is changing too, right? So when we look at people who might be in athletics, like Division I athletes, or people who might be in the military, special operations, there's a lot of mindfulness that's required to be a top level athlete or an effective. Yeah, exactly. So like a sniper, for example, would be very good at meditating and maintaining concentration for an extended period of time. So the mindfulness piece is really important to high performance. And then the other piece then is that to really be able to manage the emotional landscape of wherever you're working to perform. And I've heard people say, and one concern is, well, if I get more kind of reflective about what I'm doing, I'll slow down. I won't be able to and the thing is, what we want to do is not remove the beauty of the sympathetic nervous system. We want to be so partnered with our body that we can move in and out of it as a partner. Mm-hmm. So when I want to be highly activated and really effective, perfect. Go. And also that I have the awareness that that's happening. And I know if it's happening when it's not appropriate for the moment. Right.
I think, I've worked with some high level baseball pitchers, and that idea of titrating the energy that you have when you're on the mound. If you're in the World Series, where do you want that energy level to be in terms of balancing parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system? Yeah. At a 10? Do you want it at an 8? Do you want it at a 6? Where's your ideal? Because the ideal shifts and changes by individual. But to have an awareness of where you're at in the moment, and then the ability to bring it up or down based on your needs and your awareness, I think is huge.
Yeah. And that's I think of, and we get back to the, this courageous warrior or the effective high performing athlete or leader, that it really is about this constant practice. And so when I see somebody there can be people that the kind of their career, their success can have this steep slope. And I often worry because an integrated deep practice has a kind of a slower slope, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of comes up, and that integrated self and that integrated leadership slowly builds with the practice, right? And then you have something that's sustainable over time. And so you'll often see someone who's going to be a high performer, and then there'll be a bit of a crash because what has kind of happened isn't sustainable, right? Mm-hmm. And they haven't partnered with the nervous system to make it happen. Sometimes there's raw talent, some things that'll get you there. And that's a cool place to kind of find somebody when they're ready to be wow, so my raw talent is running yep. I can't run on this alone. And then what else is going to bring me up to this long-term sustainable high performance? And that includes great effort and great rest and integrated, concentrated time with your body, really thoughtful relationships, space in your schedule to be kind and to have space to make things happen. So it's complex and yet kind of simple.
And this is a tangent, but when you were doing this earlier, the association I had with this was the work of Kristin Neff on self-compassion.
Yeah.
And, showing yourself kindness or connecting with that heart energy to give yourself love. That was it was interesting. I was just oh yeah.
Well, Kristin Neff has a self-compassion meditation that I actually think of that. And I have many of my patients mm-hmm. use that meditation when they're being with their feelings, because in the meditation, she asks you to think of something that's difficult that's happened in your life. And then she asks you to start to identify the feelings that go with it. And then where are they in your body? And then you breathe into where they are in the body. And then you acknowledge how courageous it is for you to be there and how it's not easy to be there, the common humanity of feeling difficult things. And then she asks you to kind of soothe yourself, that loving kindness that you can give yourself, good work, and I'm trying to think the exact words she uses, but it's a bit of a soothing for just being there in that moment and breathing into that feeling. It's a beautiful meditation. I think they're available on her website for free.
Yeah, at kristinneff.com.
Yeah.
So question, again, this is a tangent, but one of the sticking points with a lot of men that I work with, I'll teach different kinds of meditation, including loving kindness, which is one of my favorite. And I'll send them home with the homework to practice loving kindness meditation. And many of them will come back and say something like, I got to the point where I was supposed to wish kind thoughts upon myself and I turned it off. That's just too weird. It's not me. I can't do that. Do you notice any sticking points in working with men, resistance to some of the tools? Any patterns there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's interesting. I think it is because, especially in our culture, men think of themselves as like caretakers of others, providers for others, and maybe to do that set up a lot of armor around like their own personal needs, and so it may feel very vulnerable to.
And I think we're socialized to be self-reliant and invulnerable. So to be kind to ourselves is a very foreign concept in many cases.
Yeah, I always try to kind of switch it around to say that self-care and self-love is actually one of the most generous things you can do for other people. And most people can think of someone in their lives who doesn't practice self-love and self-care, where that puts a great burden on other people. Where other people have to step up and kind of make up the difference where they're not doing the work. So you can kind of think like, oh yes, this person in my life they might be struggling with substance use and they're not taking care. And then the family has to kind of do a lot to worry and make sure they're okay. Like the idea of self-care before you run yourself into a struggle, right, is very powerful. I really think self-care is generous.
I think that's it's a common lesson that I teach to clients, the idea of putting yourself first and getting your needs met first so that you've got a positive bucket, so that bucket of positive emotions is full. So you have something on an ongoing basis to hand out or share with others. If you always put yourself last, it's a surefire path to burnout.
Right. And my team has developed a scale called the Mindful Self-Care Scale. And you can find it on my website. It's just CatherineCook-Cottone.com, but we're working on its own website here at the university at Buffalo. So it should have its own place soon. So you don't have to dig through my webpage. But we've researched it among medical residents, and it's been used with medical residents at the Mayo Clinic. It's been used with hospice workers. I'm trying to think of everybody now. College students, people trained to be psychologists. It's in like 5 different languages.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super cool. So, and it hits all the domains of the attunement model.
That's awesome, Catherine.
Yeah. So
Congratulations.
I tried to figure out how do we work with the attunement model for actionable practices for patients, right? So each of the items is actually a practice. So like in a really simple one is, are you hydrating? Are you drinking, enough water every day, 4 to 6 cups of water? But anyways, the self-care scale in the research, it's the more self-care you have, the less likely you are to use alcohol. The more self-care you have, the less burnout you have across a whole bunch of fields, including medical residents and things like that. The more self-care you have, the less risk for eating disorders. I'm trying to think of all the findings, and it's being studied in all different countries right now. And this particular kind of self-care is unique in that it's not just, I'm going to go to my yoga practice, which takes an hour or an hour and a half by the time you factor in travel. It includes informal practices, we call them, but it's a way to practice while you're doing your daily activities. So I might, as a medical resident, between seeing patients, as I'm washing my hands, I can wash my hands and say a short loving kindness, like wishing a patient well. And then I go to the next patient. I can do a mindful walking meditation myself as I walk from teaching one course to another here at the university. I can pause and do mindful breathing before I start doing the dishes in the sink. The way I do laundry at my house is a very mindful practice. I like every piece of clothing I fold, I have a wish for that person who's going to wear that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So you can do laundry and it's a meditation.
Do you include yourself in that?
Yeah. And I'm also like, I like to remember. So like if somebody wore it in a lacrosse game and they like scored, right? You like do a little memory for like, that score. Or for me, it'll be like, that presentation, you were wearing that dress, right?
Like a highlight memory.
Yeah. Yeah. A highlight reel of laundry.
Yeah. But that's a great practice. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, You knew my mom.
Yes, I did.
We had 5 kids in my family, and she was constantly over her head with laundry. And I remember when I was little, just looking at her thinking like, there's got to be a better way.
So the other place that I wanted to go with you, and thank you for sharing what you have already. I think it's brilliant, and I'm so proud of what you've done. The other part is talk a little bit about the 4 immeasurables in yoga and the 8 limbs, if you would.
Yeah. So I'll start with the 4 immeasurables. So yoga is kind of what you're doing. I guess I can kind of talk about both at the same time. So the what in yoga is the 8 limbs. So the asana or the poses are just 1 limb. So they have 2 limbs that are more the philosophy, which I have a book, Mindfulness and Yoga for Self-Regulation, that I go through all the limbs and how you can use those limbs with your patients. But the first 2 are the yamas and the niyamas, and they are really a philosophy for how to be with yourself and others in a way that feels really good. And so again, it kind of fits the model too, and the yamas and the niyamas. And then the 3rd limb actually is the asana or the yoga postures. And then the next one is breath work. And I love it because it was, as I got into trauma-informed work, they're always like, work with the body first, ground the body first, and then breathe. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the exact order that the limbs are in yoga, that it's like inherently trauma-informed. And
I remember, pardon me for interrupting, I remember I was kind of shocked to find out that some people just focusing on the breath can be traumatic for them because to focus awareness on the body can re-trigger the trauma.
Yeah, so it's a very careful grounding process. And that's why in yoga too, there's the whole yamas and niyamas are kind of first. Like the first yama is ahimsa, which is do no harm, right? So we just start there. And you can work with your patients through all of them. There's the second one, which is really cool, is satya, which is truth. So kind of do no harm and then be really honest. And then how do you balance honesty and truth? So there's all this work you do actually almost before you get on the mat. So that once you're on the mat, you're grounding, and then you add the breath. And then after that become the meditative limbs where you really work toward kind of this, ultimately samadhi or like a kind of connection with the highest level of self, which some people argue is like self-actualization, right? Is it something we can touch from time to time or, but that's the kind of highest.
So that's sort of enlightenment at the end, right? Which, I like the idea that there's no enlightened beings. There's just people who have enlightened moments.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's times I would say when I've had enlightened moments, but then there's times when I'm disappointingly human.
Right. Or just human.
Yeah. I'll take that.
I've done it very recently myself. And then I always think of the 4 immeasurables as the how, right? So one of them is joy, which I love. So it's kind of how you do stuff. And so you kind of cultivate joy, and life should have an element of joy in it. Another one is compassion. And so that's that understanding our common humanity, knowing that we all struggle and we all fail, that we all are frustratingly human. And then equanimity. And equanimity is kind of like what we're trying to say, exactly like your picture on the mound, and kind of where is my nervous system and how am I balancing it?
Yeah, I think that is evenness of mind, evenness of mood, or evenness of emotion.
Yeah. That I don't need to necessarily follow the extremes of life into the extreme.
That's a hell of a concept and difficult.
It's hard.
But it's a good goal.
Yeah. And you recognize yourself when you kind of followed it, and then that self-regulation, you pull yourself back in, you're like, oh, there I was lost. Well,
I think that's part of the, pardon me for interrupting, I think that's part of the point of resiliency. And what you're talking about is we are going to veer away from that, the mean, that average where we want to be. But I think the point of resiliency is how do I get back there as quickly as I can with more wisdom, with more energy to proceed?
Yeah. One of my colleagues, Kelly Boys, I love how she says it. She's like, the minute that you know that you're lost is perfect, because then you're not lost anymore. That it's like, yay, I just realized it, and now I have a chance I can pull myself back in.
And that to me seems like the mindful moment, right? It's the aha, the awareness, and then you pull yourself back.
Yeah. And then you're like, I was super lost right there, and I'm pulling it in, I'm reining it in. And then the last one is very beautiful about loving kindness. And so to approach all this stuff with the sense of loving kindness. And it's interesting. I think that's when, where you're saying, I was just thinking of your, the person you were working with, you were saying that had trouble offering themselves loving kindness. Mm-hmm. And so to really then say, perfect, then that's right there. That'll be the challenge. That's like the courageous warrior.
Yeah,
like
that's where the work lies.
Yeah. And so then just start with like, hey, you know what, buddy? You're not half bad.
I remember working with, some really depressed 20-year-old, and I'd worked with him for years. And when I first gave him a compliment, like a year into working together, I gave him a compliment on his hair and he goes, fag. I was like, oh man, we need to do some work on receiving compliments well, don't we? Like,
well, and in our culture, love is so romanticized, right? And so that can be part of the discomfort, I think, for men. If the only way that I think of love is romantic, then if you compliment my hair, you must be hitting on me.
Well,
right?
And the problem, I think, with the English language is we don't have many words for love. Like I can describe it like parental love or sibling love or romantic love, but we don't have that many words to describe different forms or variations of love. And I think that's a great problem with the English language.
Yeah. I'm not sure of the exact number, but in Sanskrit, there are many, many words for love.
Mm-hmm. In French as well, is my understanding.
Oh, in French too? Oh, yeah. There's this, so loving kindness of the self, I believe, is Maitri. So it's Maitri. So it's a special kind of loving kindness in Sanskrit, and that would be self-love. And I like that it sounds like my tree, because the idea that I just picture like self-love being this really grounded and rooted and flourishing place, although it's spelled Maitri. But it isn't the same word depending on how you're loving or the object of love, and really making a distinction between a sexualized or romanticized love and just loving kindness is something that you could feel for. It's non-sexualized. It's like just non-romantic, just this deep caring for someone else or yourself. And so exploring too with patients, like, how do you view love? Like, what types of love are there? Can we work through different relationships? Like, does it show up in different ways with different people in your life, your son, your daughter, your father, your mother, your friends, your partner, and really digging into how it's showing up. But that would be the immeasurables, the kind of how we do stuff.
So changing subject slightly, you've traveled the world with your yogis in service and your research. Talk a little bit about your experience of how masculinity differs around different parts of the world, if you can.
Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge too that I'm working with this program called Peace on Purpose with the United Nations Foundation. It's funded by Lululemon generously through the next 3 years to let us keep traveling through countries, and also through Africa Yoga Project. I've been able to do this work. And part of that work's funded by Kate Spade. So just to acknowledge the people that are allowing us to do this work, that there's really different ways that men and women experience their bodies and experience relationships and experience community throughout the world. Even when you kind of look at who's most excited to do yoga, or the way we even put the yoga mats in the room, what it feels like to talk about feelings. In our Rwanda work recently, we have in Yogis in Service, we have a principle that's I am worth the effort. I am worth the effort. And I was just working with we have a group of mentors that are mentoring the yoga teachers in Rwanda. And they don't have a good way to translate worth that doesn't have to do with money.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So we're having to like dig into a new way to say that principle. And so we're thinking more that I am deserving of effort. I'm deserving, because worth in some languages it's more monetized. And then and especially in places where there could be human trafficking, we don't want to like reinforce a kind of right that my worth is only monetary. So those are kind of some of the fascinating nuances. I just got back from Amman, Jordan, and we did the mindfulness training for 2 days. And I was so lucky at the end of the second day. And both days we had yoga classes and mindfulness. At the end of the second day, that they invited us to stay for a party. And in these parties, there's no alcohol, and everyone dances as if they're 3 drinks in. Like, it's so fun. And I got to learn the Jordanian traditional dances, and everyone's laughing. And at least 5 people came up to me and said, "This is how we do yoga. This is our way of being with our bodies." Yeah. So it was really beautiful.
Yeah. And so thank you for speaking to that. I just like the idea that there's not one ideal way to be masculine, which I think is kind of sold to us or taught to us in the US. I think there's hundreds of ways to be masculine. And I think the more we can be accepting of all of them, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah. A young man, Isaac, who's an amazing teacher with the Africa Yoga Project, was just visiting, and he came to my house for the day to spend time with us. And I asked him what he wanted to do. I'm like, is there anything you want to see, while you're here? And we had known each other from before. So I felt close enough with him, like, whatever you want to do. And he's like, he wanted to cook us a meal. And so he cooked us a meal from East Africa. And we went to Whole Foods and got everything he needed. And it took hours, and we sat and talked while he cooked us a meal that was so delicious and amazing. And in Kenya, there's just this different way of being masculine, that men often are just extremely kind of quiet and deeply with you and acknowledging of you in a very compassionate and kind way. And that sometimes I don't see here as easily for people just in public. Like in the United States, men can be that way privately, often. But just a public kind of deep connection and softness that can be there that I like, not to generalize to all Kenyans, but it's just something that I noticed, that it seemed easier.
When you were saying in one of the cultures you were in that the men they showed their love for the family by being nurturing and cooking for the family.
Yeah. Well, and that was like when I asked Isaac, and I don't, his story is not my story to tell, but he had learned how to cook young, and he said he loved it. It was like his way of really taking care of others and giving to others. And it was very meditative for him. Mm-hmm. And when you ate the food, like we all ate the food, and it wasn't just good. It came from this like meditation and the conversations that we were having over the hours that he prepared the meal. So it was good, and then extra like soulful because of that. And to me, it was just
a food infused with love and meditative thoughts, perhaps.
Yeah. And our community that we had, like the 5 of us that were sitting around, not helping him, like we kept offering, and he's like, I have it. Yeah. And just talking and being with, and for him, that was exactly what he wanted to do for us, to provide for us in that way.
And I think that's a beautiful gift too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one more question, and then we'll wrap up. But I wanted to talk about your work around eating disorders, because I remember when I started working in this field, 25 years ago or so, my assumption was that eating disorders only happen in females. And then I started working with men, and then I'd have men come in here and there with eating disorders. Mm-hmm. So speak to a little bit about your work in that area, if you would.
Yeah, it's funny because my daughter just got so upset because she's in college. And she said, our professor just said that eating disorders are only female problems. I'm like, oh, he was wrong. I said, here's all the information. I said, in a kind and reflective way, you can help educate. But they're definitely more diagnosed in females, we know. And there's some concern that they may be underreported in men. So the numbers we do have could be even, they're not reflecting of the struggle, because it may not be, men may not feel okay to disclose that they've been struggling. I'm trying to think of the exact numbers. The percentages are higher than you think. It's something like 10 to 15% of those diagnosed, and this comes from the Eating Disorder Association, with anorexia or bulimia are male. So
10 to 15%, yeah.
The people that are diagnosed. So
and I think, pardon me for interrupting, I think that all of us see our body somewhat distorted. Like, we don't see our body as it actually is because of that negativity bias. We over-focus on the parts of our body we dislike or hate. And a lot of the people I talk to just don't see their bodies as they are.
Right. And there's a focus on seeing your body as opposed to experiencing it and feeling it and being with it. So without that, that's where the yoga comes in, right? To getting back to the whole experience of self, instead of the, what do I see? What do I look like? The kind of objectified version of self, that I'm only valuable in terms of another's gaze. Mm-hmm. Like, what might they think when they see me? So that my relationship with my body would shift to that my heart is beating, that my hands are reaching. So Jessica Oliva, her research is on like getting people to focus back on the function of the body. Mm. Tracy Toka, Neva Pran, there's a whole kind of team of people that I work with. We're really working on this embodied experience. So then now the specific like parameters of my body become really less relevant. And that I don't need to spend time comparing them to beauty ideals that shift all over the place, or masculinity ideals that are really unattainable for most people. And if it's kind of like self-actualization, it's not like self-actualization, but it's like it in the way that often people in photographs that have put the images out there, that's a peak moment where they've kind of worked up to and then kind of fasted to get there. And it's not a lived happy experience of the body. Mm-hmm. It doesn't represent a holistic approach to being with and in and through your body, right? So it might look a certain way on an Instagram picture, but what's the life behind that body? Like, what's the story of that body?
How happy are they?
Yeah, how happy, how sustainable. And I want to know how that body feels and, what it wants and the goals of that person in life. How are your relationships, right? Food. Yes, hungry. I want to eat a good food with someone I love, is what your body is saying. Yeah.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that I should have asked you but didn't? Anything you would like to add? Any social media you want to put out there?
Nothing I can think of. I really enjoy the conversation. I think getting people to consider embodiment instead of that kind of, I have this body that I need to shape and control and manage. The illusion that we can manage our lives by somehow managing our bodies, controlling our bodies, and shifting to that I can self-regulate through a really positive relationship with my body that goes all the way down to what, like, I am my body. Me and this body are in it for life, and we are tremendous partners if I allow that in my life.
All right. Well, great words to end on. And again, thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was good to see you.
And tell all the family hi.
I will. Same. All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.